A fire lights up the midnight sky.
There were flames shooting out the windows.
The owners of the home nowhere to be found.
We came across the remains of a fire victim.
Was it an accident or was it intentional?
In some point during the evening, I remember communicating with our county homicide unit.
When you heard there had been a threat to burn the house down, what went through your mind?
It was like a foreshadowing of what was going to happen.
Hi, I'm Nancy O'Dell. Today's Crime Exposé takes us to Duquesne, Pennsylvania, a small suburb of Pittsburgh. When a home was ravaged by a fire, investigators worked tirelessly to figure out how it started. And what they found underneath the burnt rubble was something that no one was prepared for. It was a cold winter's night when a fire lit up the sky, and residents on Friendship Street watched in horror as their neighbor's house became engulfed in flames. One of them called 911.
It came in as a fire call after midnight on December 30th.
The first to arrive at the scene was a local Duquesne police officer. Neighbors told her the home belonged to James and Maureen Karr. Why were the neighbors so worried?
I recall some of the neighbors saying that they haven't seen the occupants, any time recently before the fire.
Worried that the couple was still inside, the officer ran towards the house to help.
She tried to go in a side door, and the fire was just way too intense. She could not enter and be safe on her own, so she had to back out and wait for the fire department.
Moments later, fire trucks began to arrive. The home was burning uncontrollably.
There were flames shooting out the windows. There was some damage to the neighboring house. If you're looking to the front of the Carr's house, the house to the left, their siding was melting. So it was a very intense fire, and it spread fairly quickly from what we could tell.
Chief Deputy Fire Marshal Don Brucker was called to the scene.
It was definitely a huge fire. It was a bigger, older home, kind of sat a little bit above grade on the high side of the roadway. I remember arriving at the scene, and there were still flames actively burning through multiple levels through the roof, venting out windows. Multiple fire companies were on scene trying to effect suppression activities, but there were a lot of obstacles in the way.
It took several hours and multiple fire agencies to finally get it under control.
It was a very catastrophic fire. Obviously the house was totaled and uninhabitable after that.
When he was finally given the all clear, Deputy Brucker and his team went inside to start their investigation.
The entire building was charred from top to bottom, with the exception of the basement. I remember making access in the basement. The only damage down there I recall seeing was water and smoke residual damage. The first floor was heavily fire damaged.
Investigators did an initial walkthrough of the home to try and pinpoint where the fire had begun.
Myself and the other investigators were there, came to a conclusion that the fire right now appears to have started in the living room area.
As they got low to the ground to examine the debris, they made a heartbreaking discovery.
We came across the remains of a fire victim, centrally located in the middle of the living room floor.
The victim was so badly burned, it was impossible to say for sure if it was a man or a woman.
Just black char, splitting. You could tell it's a human being, but there's no initial identification markings.
But when the medical examiner's office showed up to remove the body and take a closer look, it was determined the victim was a woman. And there was another shocking discovery.
Her body was badly charred, beyond recognition, but investigators could see that there was wiring on her and near her.
Her hands and wrists appeared to be bound by the wire material. The packaging was found nearby.
It was artificial flower wire. So I'm not big into crafting, but we started to dig in a little bit to find that stuff out. And it is more of a really light gauge green wire you can buy in spools or a thimble, if you will. And it's used for putting together artificial flower arrangement.
Suddenly, the fire investigation had turned into something much darker.
You have a fire victim that is bound with wire. So at that point, in some point during the evening, I remember communicating with our county homicide unit.
They know this is foul play. This is, somebody's tied up. So they're not questioning whether this is an accident. They know it's a crime. Now it's, how did this happen and who did it?
There were broken bottles, he was slashing the tires.
Maureen and James were not getting along.
The cracks started to show.
After the body was removed from the home for autopsy, fire investigators continued to search for clues about what caused the massive blaze. Everything they found pointed towards arson.
The fire was then classified as incendiary nature, and that was our conclusion based on a lot of work and a lot of scene processing and teamwork with our fellow investigators.
With that ruling, the case was now a homicide investigation. The victim was positively identified as 56-year-old Maureen Karr. Her autopsy told a horrifying story about the way she was murdered.
There was carbon monoxide poisoning as well as cyanide found in her bloodstream. She was breathing during the process of the fire.
She wasn't killed and then bound. She would have suffered. She would have died from the fire and the smoke inhalation.
Detectives broke the news to Maureen's family. They learned she was one of 7 children and extremely close to her sisters.
They described her as a very bubbly person, liked to have fun.
She was described as such a beloved member of her family. She had 2 jobs. She took care of a neighbor's disabled child. Just a person that really lit up the room.
Maureen had been married for 14 years to James Karr, but they had recently separated. He moved out and was living with his mother about 20 minutes away. Before investigators went to speak with him, they wanted to know details about the couple's relationship.
At first, she had been very happy to meet him, and then the cracks started to show.
Maureen told those close to her that James would drink and do drugs, and they would get into a lot of arguments.
Maureen and James were not getting along. I think James had become a little bit emotionally abusive.
Police say Maureen was unhappy and tired of dealing with him.
As her relationship with James wore on, a lot of that light seemed to go away.
After an argument one night in early December, she finally had enough. Investigators say when she asked him to move out, he exploded and threatened her.
There were broken bottles. He was slashing the tires.
She went to the court and got a temporary PFA. That's a protection from abuse order.
There was a hearing to make the PFA permanent just 2 days before Maureen was killed in the fire.
On that date, December 28th, he came to court under the impression that he was going to have to do some counseling and be able to get back with his wife, and that was not the case.
During the hearing, James began to shake uncontrollably and told the judge he was having an epileptic seizure. The judge sent him home.
The case was reset for a date in January.
But sadly, Maureen died before that court date could happen. All eyes turned to James Karr, who became the prime suspect in his estranged wife's murder.
It was like a foreshadowing of what was going to happen.
She had witnessed James, I'll burn the house down before I let you leave.
Armed with the details about his rocky marriage and recent breakup, investigators went to speak with James Karr. They found him at his mother's house. What did he say when detectives asked him about the fire that killed Maureen?
He denied any involvement with Maureen.
James told detectives he knew about the fire because a neighbor had called to tell him that his house was burning down. He said he had spent that night out with friends. Investigators worked to verify his alibi.
I, along with my partner, went to track down people that were reportedly with Maureen's estranged husband in the hours leading up to the fire starting the night before.
One friend named Cliff told police that he did go out with James in Duquesne that night. They went to a bar and then to another friend's home. It seemed to verify James' alibi, and Cliff told detectives that at some point in the night, he realized James had disappeared.
Sometime between 8 and 9, Cliff said that James just sort of left, and the friends became concerned because they did know about the PFA, and they were a little worried that James might have been going to Maureen's, and they knew he shouldn't be there, so they did go and look to see if he had gone to the house, and they did not see him there.
Cliff said James never came back, so he went home. Then at 12:07 a.m., he got a call from him.
James said, "Hey, I'm outside. Can you give me a ride home?" Cliff said, I don't have a lot of gas in my car, but I can take you part of the way. So he took James to a gas station that was sort of halfway between Duquesne and South Park. And Cliff said it was his understanding that James's mother was going to come get him.
Cliff then told police that right after he dropped off James, he got a call from another friend who told him that James's home was burning down.
He calls James right away and he's like, "Hey, your house is on fire." And James was pretty nonchalant. I think that's even the word that Cliff used. He said he was nonchalant about it.
Detectives couldn't believe it. If what Cliff was saying were the truth, then the timing of when James showed up at Cliff's home for the ride was around the same time that a neighbor called 911 to report the fire. How were you able to verify what Cliff was telling you?
We went to the gas station and we did find video surveillance from that BP gas station. And it lined up with the timeline that Cliff had. We could see Cliff pull up with James. James gets out of the car. He goes into the convenience store. Cliff leaves.
Since Cliff lived within walking distance to Maureen's home, it was entirely possible for James to set the fire and run to Cliff's house. James had the motive and the means, but investigators still needed more.
Another detective found a neighbor who said that he called James, not knowing about the PFA, thinking James was in the house, and he said, I see smoke coming out of your house, And he said, "Oh, I don't live there anymore." And the guy said, "Well, is Maureen there? You need to get her out of there." And he goes, "I can't call her. I don't have her phone number, and I have a PFA anyway. I'm not allowed to talk to her." And again, like, blasé, not concerned.
Another neighbor who was friends with Maureen came forward to tell police something chilling.
She had witnessed James threaten Maureen and specifically said, "I'll burn the house down before I let you leave and take it."
It's like a foreshadowing of what was going to happen.
The circumstantial evidence against James Karr was adding up, but there was nothing physical to tie him to the fire and Maureen's murder. Investigators went back to the one piece of evidence they had in the case.
The floral wire was obviously an issue. Where did it come from? Who introduced it into the scene?
They did a search warrant of James's mom's house and found that exact type of wiring in her house.
James' mom was crafty and used it to make holiday decorations. With the discovery of the wire, detectives felt as if they had enough to make an arrest, but still hoped that Karr would confess.
They brought Mr. Karr to their headquarters and began questioning him about the night's events at that point in time.
Sensing that police were closing in on him, Karr stopped talking and asked for an attorney. Before they left the room, though, detectives told him that he was being charged with Maureen's murder.
So he was left with his thoughts for about 15 minutes. And then he knocked on the interview room door and asked to talk to the detective again.
Detectives came back inside and Karr started talking.
At first, he kept saying, I don't remember. I just don't remember. I was drinking that night. I did crack that night. I just don't remember what happened.
But as the questioning continued, he buckled under pressure.
He said, well, when I went to my wife's house, and then he realized he had slipped up, and the detective pounced on that and said, okay, you were at your wife's house. Let's keep going now.
He then gave investigators his version of what happened that night, which began with showing up to Maureen's home with an axe.
He came in, he did have, the axe in his hand, but he said his wife, Maureen, came at him and he pushed back on her, so she hit her head on the kitchen counter, and he tried to resuscitate her but couldn't. So at that point, he bound her, dragged her into the living room, and set the fire.
Did he say what he used to start the fire?
Vodka. Yeah, he poured a bottle of vodka all over her and then left a trail from her body to the back door of the house and lit it from the back door of the house.
Police say he then walked away as the home went up in flames with Maureen inside, unable to escape.
The house burned around her, and there were also 2 dogs at home. Both of them perished in the fire.
James Karr went to trial for the first-degree murder of his wife, Maureen, opting for a judge instead of a jury to decide his fate. Prosecutor Mike Sullivan argued the murder came down to one thing.
It's a domestic violence case, and in my years of being a domestic violence prosecution expert, power and control is the name and game of domestic violence.
For years, James had that power and control over Maureen until she decided she had had enough.
When she got that PFA, James was losing power and control. And when he went to the final PFA hearing and it didn't go as expected, then at that point he's desperate, and he takes the ultimate act of power and control and took her life.
The judge wasn't convinced that the crime was premeditated and found James Karr guilty of second-degree murder. Still, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And now, it's time for today's Safety Spotlight. While a court order of protection is one way to help protect yourself from an abusive partner, it may not be enough to ensure your physical safety, particularly if you have shared a residence with your abuser. For additional protection, change your locks and security codes and avoid letting a hostile ex into the residence, especially if they have a weapon or are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Call police to alert them that your abuser is present and in violation of the order of protection. And for additional safety information and resources, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. I'm Nancy O'Dell. For all of us here at Crime Exposé, please join us next time and stay safe.